Hello and welcome to On the Lam, Doof Media's dive into Warbo's most sticky, icky work. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And oh boy, that new intro music. It's
very Twig, isn't it?
It's very Twig appropriate. No, that's the intro music for pilot season. This is one of our shows that we're doing for pilot season. If you're not familiar with what that is, basically we're going to try out 8 different pilots, the first episodes of 8 different shows, and we're giving you all the opportunity to vote on which ones you like and which ones you'd like to see us continue. Not that we're going to just listen to your votes, we're also going to choose, but have your say. It does matter to us.
Yeah, we're not 100% sure where we want to go from here, so knowing what you all want is just as important as knowing what we want, and pilot season is a way for us to explore that, for us and for you.
Yes, this pilot is the pilot to On the Lam, which is our deep dive into Wildbow's Twig, because it wouldn't be a possible, new show for the Doof Media Network if doing a Wildbow deep dive wasn't on the cards.
Yes, and obviously special thanks to Kurkistan, who donated during All Packed Up to make this episode a reality. Kurkistan felt very passionately that we should touch on Twig, and I'm glad they did.
Yeah. But now, enough of this goddamn housekeeping. Let's start talking about some Twig, am I right?
Okay. This
episode will be covering Arc 1, Taking Root. So let's start with Taking Root 1.1, where we meet the Lambs. Sylvester, our protagonist, Gordon, the golden boy, Helen, the mysterious girl, I'll just call her, Jamie, the quiet one, and Lillian, the outsider. They're a group of children between, 12 and 14, and they track down a man who has made a monstrous snake cat monster, and they then feed him to it. And these are our heroes.
Yeah, that seems like the right word for them.
Yes, they're heroes, all of them. I mean, Gordon kind of is a hero. Like a Greek hero kind of vibe.
Yeah, Greek hero is perfect for it, because we see more of him later, and he's hardly... I think Sai says he's not noble later, and I think that's the perfect phrase for it. He's this sort of classic Greek hero in all the various senses that entails.
Exactly, which I quite like. Actually, it feels like, the setting of this story isn't this at all, but it kind of feels like this vibe of like Greek mythology running through it. Like you kind of get allusions to things like Prometheus throughout this arc.
Yeah, there are a lot of like Greek and Roman references to stuff like that. They clearly holds a lot of weight in this world, and you're right, I think there are a lot of fun references to that hidden throughout the arc.
In fact, even the name of the story, Twig, is a reference to a Greek word, the word, I think, klonos, which means twig, which is the root word for clone, and that's why it's called Twig.
Yes, these are all facts that we knew before reading the interlude, of course.
We'll get to... I can't remember who it was on the Discord, but somebody called out that it was a real take that you worm moment at the end of the interlude, and I was like, you know what, it totally is, and I'm all for it. Anyway,
I needed that connection explained to me. I'm going to admit it. I wouldn't have made that myself.
Let's talk about this story though.
Sure.
Yeah, because these characters are our protagonists. Sylvester specifically is our protagonist, while the rest of his team. And I think this is the only Wildbow work where the main characters aren't like good, like with a capital G. I won't get into spoilers, but at the start of each of these stories, these characters are all like heroic, right? In the actual sense of the word, not in the slimy Greek hero way. They're actual heroes. And you can tell immediately that Twig is very different. These children are not good. And the fact that they're children and not, like, kind-hearted also is quite fun. But yeah, this world is clearly more grey than any of Wildbow's other worlds. And our main characters really inhabit that middle ground with gusto.
Yeah, you're right. Like, most of the other Wildbow works, in fact, most other stories, start by introducing you to the good aspects of our main characters, whereas Twig, as you said, opens with them like feeding this guy to his snake cat monster thing. And I think what's really fun about it is, before this sort of happens, he goes on and he has this big speech about how the Academy is awful and has made the world terrible, and he brings up all these, to me, they seem like fairly valid points about what's wrong with the Academy.
Yep.
And the kids' only response to it is, "Yep, we work for them." Like they don't try and contradict any of his moral arguments as well. And I think that really helps sell just that. Yeah, they're not heroes in the sort of superhero sense. They're just completely okay with being on the bad side from the looks of it, is sort of the impression I got
Well,
while reading this the first time.
yeah, I mean, we learn throughout the rest of this arc that their relationship with the Academy is complicated, obviously, but they definitely don't seem to care that people think that they're shitty. Like, that ship's kind of sailed for them, right?
Yeah, there's no attempt to justify themselves at all.
Yes.
Whether that's because they don't need to or because they don't think they need to, you know. But,
or just they don't care to, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like, you know, right from the get-go, it's sort of like we learn that this is a world that's pretty shit, and this gang doesn't really seem interested in trying to fix that.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Which is, it's different coming from doing Deep Impact.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the first lines of this story, shall we? I'll read out the first few lines here. How does it go? The first lesson, something even the uninitiated know. For life to flourish on the most basic level, it requires 4 elements: carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. And that's our introduction to the world of Twig. It's interesting, and you know, that's why people come to On the Lam, of course. That's our unique proposition amongst the Doof Media Network, is we always talk about and compare the Wildbow works, obviously, as you've seen so far. So let's compare this one to the other Wildbow works. What do you think, Elliot?
I mean, I really like this as an opening line. It puts you in that biology mindset, like, straight away, which, you know, is obviously important.
Yes.
For the story, from the looks of it. Maybe I'll finally get some use out of that stupid molecular biology degree that I mistakenly got. But yeah, like, I love the way it's then used throughout the rest of the chapter to, like, set the scene. Like, it's a really clever little writing thing where Sai, in his narration, then goes through and lists, like, the carbon in the room, the oxygen, the nitrogen, and the hydrogen.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a really fun way to introduce us to the scene and the world and, like, what's happening right now.
Yeah, it definitely feels very thematic, doesn't it? Which is good. I think it... I wonder, thinking about the first lines to other Wildbow works, obviously Pact we just covered, the way that those first 3 phrases of damn me, damn them, damn it all were repeated throughout the story. I'm wondering, I'm kind of thinking off the top of my head, how would that be possible with these words? And what cool ways can this concept be, be repeated throughout the story or kind of re-hit? And I'm not sure. I'm excited to see whether that happens.
Yeah, cool focus on, you know, biology stuff there. Like, there's a lot more to play with. But like you mentioned, like, how great this is at setting the scene, and I think that's something this chapter just does incredibly, like, overall. So for reference, I'm kind of reading off of notes as we're talking that I was writing as I read through the arc. So like, something I've already written here after just reading the first chapter is how effective stuff, like, you know, they're in a barn that was converted into a warehouse that was half converted into something else. Sai sort of looks out the window and sees that, like, all the buildings in this city are, like, supported by, like, trees that have grown in, but they're not always grown in, right? Like, it's just so immediately, like, yeah, it's so immediately sort of put into your head that this is a world that's been haphazardly raised quickly and inefficiently. Like,
yeah,
you know, the academy is built on these shitty trees that Sai notes are reeking of decay. Like, it's so tenuous, everything that this world is built on, and it's all rushed and not done properly. And the fact that is sort of shown to you just through the architecture of the, like, the first scene is really cool.
Yeah, you're right that the story does have this vibe of things being a bit kind of slapdash. I would say even in, like, the most intricate things we see in the story, which are these kind of scientific experiments that obviously are a major part of the story, they never feel like... They always feel like they never have gone completely correctly. Like, they've always gone about 90% correct at best. Like, nothing ever goes right in this world, and that's the kind of world that we're introduced to.
Yeah, and like, that's absolutely the vibe I got even from this first chapter, and I think that's a testament to how well set up the world is in this writing.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fun opening. Basically, the setting that we get is that there's a place called the Academy, or the academy near them is Radham Academy, but we get the sense that the Academy is a kind of, you know, organization that exists in multiple places with
franchise. Franchise seems like an overly like economical term for it, but like it seems like the academy is a franchise type thing.
Well, yeah, almost like a university, or like a series of universities. You know, like it's the Ivy League, right? And in this academy, people study, but they also do experiments. Bringing monsters to life, basically, is the one type of thing that people do. Is trying to push the envelope in terms of technology, but not silicon chips, but life. So the setting is like this gothic biopunk setting, right? That's the phrase that people call it. But I've never actually read any biopunk stuff before. That's just kind of what I know of Twig, and it's interesting because we've got the Parahumans universe, we've got Pact, which are both like existing genres. They're quite well known. Superhero stuff obviously is well known in today's Marvel movie era, and Pact is modern supernatural, which is again very popular. You've got your Harry Potters, you've got your Dresden Fileses, you've got whatever else, supernatural itself, I suppose. And Wildbow definitely like took these genres and did his whole like deconstruction, reconstruction thing on them. But this is not a genre, at least to me, that is like immediately obvious. I can't immediately go, oh yeah, so there'll be like these kinds of monsters and there'll be these kinds of problems. Like that just doesn't really exist in the zeitgeist as much. So I'm really interested to see what kind of world Wildbow will create when he's not doing this whole deconstruction thing. He's just kind of creating a relatively unique world.
Yeah, you're right. Like biopunk is an underexplored genre. Like for me, the sort of first thoughts are like Bioshock, as the most biopunky thing I can think of. But it's also, as you mentioned, there's a real Victorian, like gothic vibe to this, which also puts me in mind of all the sort of gothic horror, like really old school stories. So the picture of Dorian Gray, Frankenstein.
Well, yeah, I think Frankenstein is the big one, right?
Frankenstein, I think is a very big influence on this story. But like a lot of the others, but that's kind of the world I almost picture is just Victorian gothic horror. And that's not as strong a genre as something like superhero or modern supernatural.
You're right that it is. We've got your Jekyll and Hydes, your Draculas, whatever. Yeah. These are obviously well-known things, and I guess that's the genre that we're playing in here is gothic horror. But it definitely, you're right. It's not, and it's not one that I think is as popular or as kind of tropey. So I'm interested to see where we go.
It's not as widespread, at least today. It was obviously more widespread back then, but now it's not.
Back then when Wildbow wrote this story like 2 years ago.
No, I meant back then as in when like Frankenstein and all those.
We got to talk more about Frankenstein actually, because that's such a like influence on this text, right? Because, and I don't know if this isn't a spoiler, but it is like meta knowledge, I guess, which is that Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, her middle name or her mother's maiden name or something was Wallstone, which gets
you've stolen that from my notes later on.
Oh, are we already going to talk about this? I'm sorry.
I was so proud of that pick.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. I didn't say anything. We'll see if we talk about that later.
Okay.
So the other thing from this chapter that we like, so obviously we're set up with Sylvester Cy, as he prefers to go by, as our protagonist, and the one strong piece of characterization we get from him this chapter is that he is a perv. Like, he looks up Lillian's skirt a few times, numerous references, and he's like 12 to 13, so like right around the age where it's a bit weird to start doing that. But he does it, and he kind of just does it to fuck with her, like because he knows it'll annoy her.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have classified him as a perv in the sense that, like, in his head we see, I don't really think there was any sexual motivation to it or anything. He just knew it was going to upset her, and that was the goal. Like,
yes.
If something else would have upset her just as much, I think he would have done it.
And he does do that later on, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But it wasn't an accident that she said, oh, I know you, if we go first, you'll just look up my skirt. Like, that's clearly something that he has done before in the past.
I mean, either that or, and again, we're jumping ahead, like, knowing a bit more about them. I think she's probably just drawing this line between something bad is something Cy would do.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy where she assumes he'll do it because it's a bad thing to do. And then she says it and he's like, well
I've got to do it now. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's it. We've talked about chapter 1 for like 15 minutes. Is that the end of the episode, Elliot? Is that it?
No, we're trying something new now. We've still got 12 more to go.
Oh, we're doing the whole arc, are we? All right. So yeah, I mean, we've come to the end of the first chapter, but I just kind of want to get a temperature check on how you feel about the lambs so far. Who's your favorite lamb? Yeah, what do you think about them?
I like Lamb as a name. Yeah, I mean, I'm just reading off the notes that I wrote here when I was only one chapter in, because they've changed a little bit.
Yes.
But Sai was an instant winner for me. People who've followed like our other stuff, particularly Deep Impact, will know how excited I get for characters that are just genuinely awful people.
But I think that's, yes, Sai is terrible, but he's not. He's not evil, right?
No, we'll get into that a lot more. I think there's a lot more depth to Sai that comes out, but you know, like these cheeky asshole characters who like are some of my favorites. So I was instantly kind of won over. I think like the first time we actually see Sai's personality come through in his narration is when he thinks it's funny how they're not flourishing. Like he references that opening line about how life needs 4 things to flourish. Then he walks through how all 4 of those things are in this scene, and he thinks to himself, but we're not flourishing, and he thinks it's funny. And you're just kind of like, fucked. Yeah, it's just kind of like, okay, there's something wrong with this kid. And then he feels, he's so smug throughout the rest of it as well. I was just instantly on board. Then I just kind of had that all the others were still mysteries to me. I thought Helen seemed the most interesting, which, you know, I think I stand by at the end of Arc 1. But let's address that again at the end, I suppose.
Yeah, let's see how your tastes change over the course of Arc 1. So yeah, the lambs head back home after their adventure, only to find their dad, in air quotes, Mr. Hale, who is managing... Actually, I don't think we know at this point exactly who Mr. Hale is to them. But clearly some kind of authority figure, right?
No, they figure out in this chapter that they mention in this chapter that he's like the creator of them, basically.
Never mind. There we go. So yeah, their dad is here, Mr. Hale, and he basically grills them a bit about their mission before he takes Sylvester to get patched up because Sylvester got badly injured in this fight.
Yeah, and I mean, this chapter does a really cool thing. You know, chapter 1 focused on introducing us to the world mostly, like as well as the characters a bit. I felt like this chapter really started to dive into Sai and how he thinks, what he was thinking about others, what they think about him. It's like this is where the personality of Sai really starts to come out, and you start to see who he is, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot more over the next 10 chapters. I think that's
most of what we're going to be talking about.
There's also a fun delivery on like the wax here. So for the first chapter and a half, they're covered in this waterproof wax, and it turns out like, you know, that was to block the smell from the snake cat creature. But something else that's mentioned a few times, so at these first 2 chapters, is that stitches, which are like these, you know, Frankenstein's monster-esque like slave creature things.
Elliot, the doctor was called Frankenstein's monster. The creature was called Frankenstein's monster's monster.
Oh, my bad. But you know, like those things are susceptible to water. Like the stitches get damaged by water, and so like I know that, you know, these kids aren't stitches, and perhaps with the exception of Helen and eventually Mary, you know, they're all mostly. Well, they were at some point like normal people. I think that it's drawing this subtle line between those 2 things in our head, like the fact that they have this waterproof wax that they're avoiding getting wet with at the start, and then, you know, we find out stitches aren't immune to, or, you know, are damaged by water. It's drawing this line of like, you know, between these kids and artificialness.
All right, I'm sorry to do this again, Elliot, but I absolutely have to. When we were talking about Pact, towards the end of Pact, and if you haven't listened to Pact, just tune out for a little bit. I mean, it's not spoilers, it'll be fine. We were talking about how it deals with concepts of humanity and what is humanity, but it doesn't go super deep in that. And this feels like a reaction to that. Like, this story is already bringing up questions of, like, what is life? What is humanity? Let's dive into this. Like, are the lambs human? Is Mary human? Is Helen human? Who knows? I'm excited to follow this along. But you're right, we start seeing these lines being drawn of, you know, stitches are clearly not human because they're basically zombies, right? But we start getting these points of what's human, what isn't. And I'm really interested to see that play out more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sai even, I think, thinks that at one point, it might even be in this chapter about, like the concept of humanity is a line that is constantly getting blurred in this world, and I can't wait to see that get played with throughout the rest of the story.
Yeah, definitely. So the thing I like about this chapter is, last chapter, Sai talks to this boy who comes across them while they're in the warehouse and basically says, hey, go to this place and do this thing. And we don't understand what it's for at the time, and it doesn't pay off in that chapter. But in this chapter, it does pay off. The boy has tipped over some water, as Sai told him to do, and this water has messed with the stitched horses that was in the coach and caused a distraction, enough time for Sai to make a play that he was planning out, a few moves in advance. And so we basically get this fruition of this plan that he's made. And this is like who Sai is, right? He's a planner. He makes these like tricksy little plans.
Yeah, well, he's a manipulator, and that's something you already start to pick up on this early on, I think. And it's very fun.
Yeah, definitely. And let's talk about his name, Sylvester, right? And he goes by Sai, but usually Sylvester is abbreviated as Sly, right? Like Sly Stallone. Which I think is fun that that's the case and that he doesn't like going by that, because Sly is a exact accurate description for what Sylvester is, right? Like Sly is, if you had to pick one word to sum him up, Sly would probably be it.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff we're going to get to talk about with regards to Sai and his own relationship to his personality.
Yes.
But I mean, the other thing that jumped out to me here was that Sylvester sort of comes, like, as a name, comes from the Latin word for forest, which I don't know what to do with Forests yet, but this
have twigs. I don't know. I'm just saying.
They have lots of twigs. Exactly. This is gonna be one of those things where towards the end of the story, I'll be able to be like,
forest, of course.
But for right now, I'm just like, interesting. I'm filing it away.
Yeah. So we get a bit more information about the Lambs and who they are. Well, except Lillian. Lillian is not an experiment, as far as we know. But the rest of them, Helen is Project Galatea, Jamie is Project Caterpillar, Gordon is Project Griffin, and Sylvester is Project Wyvern. And so we don't get much information beyond that, but it's fun to take a look at these names and try and read into them. Especially Helen, who is Galatea, which was a Greek myth of a statue of a woman that came to life, which pretty much describes Helen as far as we know so far.
Yeah, what's really funny is I have sort of written here in my notes in after reading 1.2 that because Helen had such a focus on already being an actress, even in 1.2 you could see that all of her emotions and facial expressions were being noted by Sai as being put on. So I had this whole thing about how she was the perfect clay, and that's where the statue that came to life thing came in. She's clay that could mold herself. It turns out that may have been more literally true than I could possibly imagine, because that's what she seems to be able to do. I suppose we'll get there. But yeah, I mean, Gordon being Griffin is fun, because he's this Griffin is so powerful and majestic.
That's what you wanted to say.
It's gonna be really fun. I'm excited to see Gordon get challenged later in the story. I assume he'll maybe get taken down some pegs or something, lose a bit of that heroic flair that sort of defines him. That could be fun. I mean, Sai being Project Wyvern as well, he's a snake. I mean, that seems to track for me.
Yep.
And then Jamie being Caterpillar was probably the one that I sat there staring at the longest. And I was I don't know what this means. I guess I want to wait for him to come out of his cocoon as a beautiful butterfly later. That's the only thing I've got with that.
What does that mean, though?
Exactly. I have no idea what direction that's heading in.
Yeah.
I think Sai calls him a bookworm later on, but I was surely Mr. Hale's not calling him Caterpillar because it's a bookworm. That makes no sense.
Named after his favourite book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, should we talk about our history with Twig? We probably should have done that in the intro, but we didn't.
Oh, yes.
I've read half of it or some of it. I don't know, maybe a third, up to arc 8. So I know a bit of where this story's going, but a lot of it is still unknown to me.
Yeah, and then obviously I hadn't read any of it before. I kind of knew it was this biopunk setting, and I knew Sylvester wasn't a traditional hero. And that was pretty much it.
That's the first 3 lines, though. So
yeah, exactly.
That doesn't get you that far.
No, that got me basically nowhere. I think about halfway through chapter 1, I was well, yep, okay, this has addressed all my foreknowledge.
Yeah. So chapter 2 ends with us understanding what Sylvester was trying to get at by looking at the files for the lambs. He was trying to find their expiration date, because these are experiments, and experiments, especially clones, presumably don't have a great shelf life. So yeah, we've got another protagonist with an expiration date, which is fun. It's an interesting ticking clock that, knowing Wildbow, is going to pay off in some horrifying ways.
Yeah, because we don't actually get explanation on what Sai finds here. He's actually hinted at a bit more later on that he maybe didn't get the best news when he's chatting to Mary later, but
yeah.
We don't find out exactly what he saw here, so it's a fun little mystery. But for me, I think it was super important to learn this early on that Sai is, to some degree artificial, or he's being manipulated to be the way he is, because I think it helps you absolve him a little bit of what a terrible person he can be at times, because if he was this much of an arsehole and that was sort of just him, you could sort of look at it and be like, this is awful. Whereas knowing that he's been made this way by this, evil corporate-ish academy, I'm just sort of it's not his fault. He's doing his best.
Yeah.
It made me much more able to get on his side, which I thought was super important.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that we haven't touched on yet is the dynamic between these characters, where Sai is a part of the family, right? Even though he is probably the most malicious of all of them, he clearly cares for them a lot, and they care for him a lot. And that's why he's doing this expiration date thing, right? Is he already kind of knows when his expiration date is, but he wants to try and help the others as much as he can.
That's the thing, and you're right, and because we do actually see that. He's not completely selfish. He is actually looking out for his team, or his friends, his family as well. So you're right, between that and learning that it's not all his fault because he was kind of made this way, it makes it a lot easier to get on board with him and enjoy when he's just being an asshat.
Yeah, definitely. All right, two chapters down. Let's move on to 1.3, where Sylvester is basically a huge asshole to everybody at the academy, but we somehow end up liking him, or kind of liking him anyway. He's informed by Hale about the team's mission. They're tracking down murderous children at an academy prep school. He goes in to meet the rest of his team and starts plotting away.
Yeah. So this chapter is a really interesting, again, examining Sai from a new angle, which is sort of how he responds to not his family. Last time I talked about how, in 1.2, we learn what he's like around other people who are familiar to him. Here we just see how awful he is if you're a stranger. He's not the most social guy, the way he locks himself in this room and everything.
Yeah.
But again, we're also learning here how much this doesn't really throw off anyone that much, because, that's what he's been made to be like.
And that's just kind of who he is, right? This is not unexpected behavior for Sai. Everyone's just kind of like, oh, not this again, Sai, instead of being like, why the fuck have you put a bookshelf in front of the door? How did you even do that?
Yeah.
Let's talk about so he's driven to the academy by someone called Lacey, who is, one of his handlers. And he has this scene where he basically, very methodically, almost Machiavellian, he lures her into a conversation and then just makes her question her entire moral viewpoint. And it's insane, right? Because Sai is so kind, or not kind, but not caring. What's the word? He cares about the rest of the lambs, I guess. But with Lacey, and even with Hale, he's cordial, if a bit cold. But with Lacey, he's genuinely a monster to her, right? This is the worst thing that I think we see him do the entire arc.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it pays dividends in 1.12.
Yes.
So maybe we should talk about it a bit more there. But, this is one of the first instances where we start to see how much Sai frames everything in terms of conversations through this lens of a competition or a chess match. He's trying to manipulate everyone with everything that he does and says. This conversation is where we really sort of learn quite early on that, the whole point of this team is they are all meant to fit tropes and work together as an ultimate team. Hale's trying to build a very complementary assassin group of children. And it's so fun trying to sort of see where Sai fits into that as the kind of chaotic wild card. I guess he's someone that's designed to I mean, I guess to steal his own metaphor later, to shake all the bugs in the box.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. He doesn't fit in the team that, like, when you think about the archetypes in the team, Sai is the one that doesn't feel like a whole puzzle piece, and we kind of learn that. The way Sylvester thinks about himself, at least, is that he's only really alive because some of the other ones failed, and so they needed as many alive as they could get, which is insane. But it kind of explains a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm keen to get more details on those people. But like, I think what we also sort of learn is Sai is one of the most valuable people in the team. So it's really interesting how he's like. I think I agree with you. It's the archetype I probably wouldn't have thought of if I was trying to design a team to function like this. But in the end, I think he's one of the most important pieces.
Yes, I mean, as we see, he's very, very useful when he's in his element.
Yeah.
And as Sai gets into his element, we get this beautiful line to finish out this chapter where he says, "I smiled. The pain in my head was going away by the second." And it's the vibe it gave me was Sherlock Holmes. It gave me him being like, the game is afoot. Let's get into it kind of vibe. And I think it's because Twig is, a bit Victorian, like that gothic horror vibe. And also obviously Sai is quite a plotter, quite a figure it out and tell the Watsons that are hurrying after you out on the way.
I mean, he's also about as humble as Sherlock.
Yeah.
He has an arrogant streak in him for sure.
Yes. Yeah. I just got that strong vibe, and I think it will be supported by the rest of this arc as we go. But yeah, it's just despite how much of an asshole he is, it's hard not to enjoy him as a character.
Yeah, like my favorite quote from this chapter comes not long after that, where he meets the headmistress, and she lies to him, and he's like, and he thinks to himself, two lies in two breaths, straight to my face. I almost liked her. Like he revels in playing in the muck in such a fun way.
Yeah, love it. So let's move on to 1.4, where Sai does some Machiavellian planning, intentionally gets himself into a fight that he can't win, and finally makes a break in the case where he sees at least some of our murderous children.
Yeah, like it is really fun getting to see Sai in his element here. Like I think from the moment we're told in 1.3 that like we're driving to root out some assassins in a school, I was kind of immediately like, okay, this seems like it would be what Sai is built for, and and we learn that the others are stuck, and Sai obviously fixes that pretty fucking quickly.
Yeah, almost immediately he just starts fucking shit up, but in a productive way.
Yeah, but it's like, this is such a fun opening arc challenge because it's so perfectly suited to Sai, so we get to see how valuable he can be, which is what we were just talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It is such a great environment for Sai because it allows him to play up his character, It allows him to play up his manipulative child character that he kind of puts on, which is great.
Yeah, well, yeah and no.
You don't think... Well, puts on maybe isn't the right phrase.
Yeah, no, he puts it on, but not entirely.
Yes.
It would be my phrasing.
Yes,
yeah,
fair enough. So yeah, here's a fun wrinkle, again, to Sai's character that differentiates him from other Wildbow protagonists, is he's terrible at physical confrontations. Like, the fight in this chapter isn't much of a fight, but it's demonstrated to us just how bad Sai is at fighting. Like, he just can't do anything here. He's terrible.
He's a mastermind manipulator. He's not the fist thrower.
But even he thinks, I can't remember if it's at this point or later in this arc, but he even thinks that Jamie would be able to take him in a fight. And Jamie is like the typical nerd. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jamie is by design the group's nerd from the looks of it, and Sai's still less of a physical threat than him.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it's very fun. I guess I assume everyone listening to this will have read at least the first few arcs of Worm, so there's very tattletale-y vibes in that way.
Yes.
Like she's not a physical threat, and Sai's kind of manipulator in similar sort of ways. I think what we learn from this fight as well that's really fun, and we see it a lot in this arc, is how Sai, it's not that he doesn't have pride, but it's like his pride is in focusing on his smarts and outsmarting other people. Like, he will take physical harm to get this mental edge. Like, that's what he does here. And we saw it in 1.1 as well when he copped the acid hit. Like, he will put his physical body on the line if it means he can maneuver himself in a position to outsmart someone else. So it's this very like selective form of pride that he has that's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It's not. You're right. It's not really pride, although he is very arrogant. It's an interesting blend, right?
Well, he's got some aspects he's proud about. Like he knows he's not a physical threat, so he doesn't care when he loses dignity on that front, because as long as he can still feel like he's outplaying them mentally, he's willing to take that sacrifice.
Yeah.
You know, like he as we already talked about, he views every conversation as a bit of a chess match, and his physical body is kind of pawn.
Yeah, exactly.
And his mind is the king and the queen.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he is an interesting character. I will see another fight that he gets into later, so I guess we'll talk about this later. Just the fact that even he's so smart that it makes him worse at fighting.
yeah, exactly. It's really fun.
So we get a bit more information on Helen this chapter, and yeah, she's so unique. Basically, she's a robot, right? I mean, like, not actually, but she basically is a perfect actress at pretending to be human. But she's not. She seems to have no actual emotions, or none that she outwardly displays, but she will immediately and very, very effectively act. Whether that's acting like a big sister to Sai, or acting offended, or acting like a teenage girl. She pulls it off perfectly.
Yeah, and the way Sai brings attention to it every time it happens, and like notes himself that he thinks it's kind of creepy, really makes that effect land on like us as readers.
Yes.
Like everything she does becomes super unnerving. And it all sort of leads to this reveal right at the end of the arc, which is great. But I'm so interested to see the actress aspect of her throughout the rest of the story. Like we even saw in 1.2 briefly, like she interacts with this older lady who wants her to be like a proper lady, and Helen kind of pretends to fit into that role so perfectly. Like you can see how, as the femme fatale she's meant to be, she's going to be like so fucking effective. I can't wait to see more of it.
Well, we'll see some more later. But that's the end of Taking Route 1.4. Let's talk about 1.5, where Sai and the group head to have a meal in the dining hall. And it feels, just as a side note, it feels pretty Hogwarts, right? Did you get that vibe? Did you get a Hogwarts vibe from this?
I mean, I guess in the sense
I don't know
got
why
like
I
the
just
old.
pictured it as the dining hall in Hogwarts.
I don't think I did. But like I definitely was picturing, old British private school.
Yeah.
Like, as Australians, like, we grow up with a lot of British TV here, and I'm picturing old British private school dining halls we would have seen on British TV growing up.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so they go to the Harry Potter dining hall to have a meal, and Sai is basically obsessed with trying to figure out how there's going to be an attempt on their life. He suspects that the murder children are going to try and poison them. But luckily, they don't get poisoned. Unfortunately, that's because the plan is to poison everybody except them. So basically the entire school starts getting sick, which means, the murder children have kicked things up a notch, and we're in a new phase of their plan.
It's such a fun twist. Like, this blew my mind as it was happening. I loved this. I was like, what? Why? What? Like, it worked. It worked so effectively on me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wild one, right? It's like... How is this the best plan that they could come up with to poison literally everybody else? But, works out.
Yeah. And I think this chapter is where we also start to see something that I'm probably going to be bringing up a lot throughout the rest of the arc, which is Sai has this sort of insecurity about like himself or his role in the group, or like, what Project Wyvern or whatever is trying to turn him into.
Yes.
Like they're all uncomfortable with the appointments they have to go to, but Sai gets really upset here where Jamie, or Sai says all the terrible things their opponents can do, and Jamie sort of quips that, well, Sai's just thinking, what would he do? And Sai actually gets a little bit offended at the suggestion that he would do these terrible things. Like this was the first bit where for me I started to be like, oh, is there a bit of a hero buried deep down within this, criminal mastermind boy?
Very, very deep down. Yes. No, you're right. And I actually think that the reason this hurts Sai so much is because it comes from Jamie. The two of them have this weird, like, bromance, I guess. I mean, they're friends. I don't know if that's the right word when they're 13 years old. They're obviously close friends, brothers, even. And I think that's what makes
Yeah,
it
well,
hurt.
and they relate to each other, I think, a bit more than either of them do to Gordon.
Yes.
So I think they are quite tight. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, enough of all this clever diving into things. Let's talk about the references that are made to Worm in this, because we talk about some books. Some books are mentioned, and these books include Dollman and the Revenge of the Swarm Queen, and Dollman and the Song of the Moon. So the first one is obviously Mannequin versus Taylor from Worm, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The second one, it made me think of Moonsong, because Song of the Moon is just like makes sense to be Moonsong. But actually, you figured out, I think, a much better thought of what this is referring to.
Well, so yeah, like I stumbled upon this because like the moon thing in Mannequin, I was like, wasn't Mannequin building like places to live on the moon? So I went to find that quote in Worm, and what I found is basically a quote of someone saying, yes, Mannequin was trying to build biospheres on the moon, and just as he was getting to do it, that was when the Simurgh hit him and sort of turned him into Mannequin.
Yep.
So I think the Song of the Moon is probably referencing good old Simurgh.
Yes, which
so that must be a really fun book in the Dollman series to read, a real uplifting
maybe that's
chronicle.
the first book. I mean, like that's when he becomes Dollman, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. That must be the first in the series.
And then also we get a reference to a book called Barber John and the Dark Forest, which maybe I've just got packed on the brain, but that feels like it's a...
No, I think that's meant to be a packed reference, and we won't go into it because I do want to avoid packed spoilers.
Yep.
In this episode, but yes, suffice to say, it's some fun little references, and I tried to see if the barber and Mannequin were chosen specifically, like because my first thought was, oh, for a reference, wouldn't you do Bonesaw?
Yeah.
And maybe that was just too on the nose or something.
Yeah,
but
I
like,
feel that.
again, this is like one of those other things where I'm like filing away that it was Mannequin and the barber to maybe try and piece that together later in the book as like brilliant foreshadowing.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, just a fun note that all of the protagonists from these books are the villains from past Wildbow works, which tells us how terrible this world is, I guess.
Yeah. I mean that seems on brand for where this is, and maybe that's just part of it. Like Mannequin was more of a villain than Bonesaw, I think.
Yeah.
But let's not get into that argument. This is a Twig podcast.
Enough about Twig. Let's talk about other Wildbow works. I want to call out this line where Sai is kind of thinking about the attack vectors that people might have used to poison them, and he thinks for a second that someone might have powdered her shirt front with a poison that could be inhaled, and then hugged him to dose him with the poison. And that's like a fucking insane thing to think, but also like it's very possible seeming. And it's just like so many levels of weird plotting deep, and that's just kind of the vibe that we get from this story is like, oh yeah, dusting your shirt front with poison to hug someone to death is totally just like the kind of assassination that is commonplace in this world.
Yeah, as I've come to experience in every Wildbow world, I'm left sitting here thinking, how do you not just go insanely paranoid 15 minutes into being in this world? But like, I think this sort of captures why I love this as the Arc 1 mystery, like this whodunit sort of, mystery of the assassins in the school.
Yeah.
Because it's got these relatable aspects, like, the school itself, like we can all sort of relate to a school environment. You've got, this poison mystery where it's poison in the food or in people's coats or whatever. Like if it was another giant snake cat thing, like we saw in 1.1, it might be easy to get lost in just the mysteries of this world in particular in Arc 1. Whereas I think this is such an approachable sort of mystery that we can all kind of get on board, and it allows us to focus more on like the characters and slowly introduce parts of the world.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the strengths of Wildbow's writing, right? Is he takes these fantastical worlds and he makes them relatable through very human character.
Yeah, and I think this is a great choice of an opening arc mystery or arc event to sort of center that around.
Yeah, because it is very like it does feel like I called it Victorian, and we talked about Sherlock Holmes a bit, but it does feel at least more relatable in that sense of like, okay, it's a Sherlock Holmes murder mystery, it's a Poirot kind of thing, we can get behind that. It lets us kind of see what people are doing in this world and get on board with something that's relatively easy to get behind.
Yeah, exactly. And that way we can focus more on the characters.
Yes. In 1.6, the group basically tries to get away to safety from this kind of school that is going into lockdown, but they end up being split up by a meddling teacher. Parents just don't understand, am I right? So Sai and Jamie go back to their dorm room to hunker down, but they're interrupted again by Ed, who is the boy that Sylvester fought 1 or 2 chapters ago. And Sylvester almost springs this trap that he had prepared on him, but realizes that Ed isn't one of the murder children, and so decides to spare him. This trap would have maybe not killed him, but at least maimed him pretty bad. Unfortunately, Ed was working for one of the murder children and delivers him to Mary, who dismisses Ed before pulling a gun on Sylvester.
Yeah. So again, another little hint that there's maybe a bit of a hero there, that Sai didn't want to hurt Ed.
Yeah.
Given that Ed's an innocent, like, especially because Ed just beat the shit out of him. Like, it would be perfectly understandable if just on an emotional level, Sai just wanted to hurt him back.
Yeah.
But he doesn't.
I think he gives the explanation of like, well, it wouldn't have helped anything, but I mean, like, sure, but Sai, you do a lot of things that aren't helpful in any way. It is a kind of compassionate move. Like, Sai could spring the trap and fuck Ed up, and that might even be the correct, like, tactical decision, but he doesn't do it.
Yeah. Like, as we learn more about, like, my understanding at this point of what is happening to these kids is that they're regularly being injected with some sort of neuro-affecting formula that, you know, like, exaggerates certain neurological patterns or whatever. So, you know, I think we're starting to maybe get insights into the little boy that Sai was before they started doing this to him. But to go back to the wider chapter, like, you know, as they get back and everything, I love how just unashamedly gross this chapter is. Like, Sai spends half of it wielding a pitcher full of vomit that he uses to offer to people to vomit in as a threat. You know, he's ready to use it as a weapon. This is one of our first chances at, like, seeing the whole group in action since 1.1, and it's just really fun.
Yeah, it's great. I love Helen in this chapter. She plays this terrified child who is worried that she's going to die from this poison, and obviously it's complete bullshit, but she's putting it on for the purpose of some other children and a teacher, and it's so terrifying how effective she is at it. Like, it works exactly how she wants it to work.
Yeah, Helen's really interesting because, like, she feels quite close to this perfect ideal of all of them. Like, she's got, in some ways, you know, she's like the second best at everything, at least in the group, I would say.
Yes.
Like, she seems like the closest thing to an all-rounder. Plus, she's got crazy special abilities. So I'm really interested, like, I don't know, Helen's just the most fun. I think at the end of Arc 1, the person I'm excited to see, like, more of the most would be Helen. I just want to learn more about, like, what makes her tick, because she's so unique and seemingly kind of, like, creepy, good at everything. Like, I don't know. I'm so excited to see more of her.
But also she has this weird, like, innocence about her, I would say. Maybe not innocence, but this, like, naivety that is very childlike in my eyes.
I don't know if I agree with that, because she's like, there's quite a number of times where she's only, like, one step behind Sai in how to manipulate people.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe, I don't know it's like that scene later on where she's reunited with Dr. Ibbot and she is, like, subservient to him in this way of, like, I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it. It just feels like she's, I mean, this feels ridiculously obvious, but, like, stunted developmentally, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm gonna be honest, I'm counting down the chapters till she kills Ibbot. I have to believe that's coming. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. She's really interesting because, and we are jumping ahead, but she's got this whole thing where she was grown in a vat, and from the seams of it, she didn't really get any natural instincts, and she's kind of learnt everything to do with, like, facial expressions, everything. It's all manual. And that's such a fun idea. Like, we talked about this whole spectrum, or it's not even a spectrum of humanity. It's all the different facets of humanity and putting different weights on them. It's a 3-dimensional spectrum. I don't know what that's called, but
yeah.
An n-dimensional spectrum. But, like, yeah, she's, like, it's just really fun. I can't wait to learn more about her and see how she ticks.
Yeah, literally, probably. So, in our next chapter, 1.7, Mary and Sai basically have a conversation while Mary is holding Sylvester at gunpoint. She's grilling him for information about his group while he is basically trying to get her on side, or not even on side, but just off guard enough that she'll make a mistake. And eventually, Gordon tracks Sylvester down. Mary escapes, but before she does, takes a shot at Gordon and then intentionally misses her shot at Sylvester.
Yeah, and so, like, I know we've already sort of talked a little bit about how great this story was at, like, dressing the setting in Chapter 1.1, but for me, 1.7 was far and away the best example of this real strength Wildbow has at drawing these very cinematic scenes. Like, the way Mary is sort of lit up by the lines of the furnace and Sai's in the dark and he can't see properly and she can, like, it's just one of those scenes that draws itself in your head so perfectly and very cinematically. Like, you just picture her as so much taller and bigger and covered in light, and Sai is like in the corner dark. Like, I just loved how, like, visual this scene was.
Yeah, it is evocative, isn't it? It's the entire chapter is this gunpoint conversation, and it's so gripping the whole way through. It's really a very engaging chapter. This is the chapter where we really see how good at manipulation Sylvester is. Like, he's playing some hardcore 3D chess here, and it's so fun. You made an allusion to Tattletale before, and I agree. Like, I think Sylvester's Wildbow's exploration of what would it be like if Tattletale was our protagonist, and it's so much fun exploring. Because this whole chapter is just Sylvester thinking, well, if I say this, she might think of this, and it might lead her down this path of thought. And it's such a different kind of conflict to anything that we're used to from Wildbow's works, or just, in general, because it's completely mental. It's this complete, like, manipulation conflict of Sai trying to lead Mary to certain thoughts while not trying to be discovered that he's doing that. And it's so fun.
Yeah, and I think it really works because we get all those insights via the narration of why he's doing what he's doing and what it means. Like, it's like as he moves each chess piece in the conversation, he's commenting on why he's done this move.
Yes.
Which makes it, like, really fun and sort of really satisfying to follow.
Yeah.
I mean, the best part, though, is obviously where the section where he surprises himself with a truth about himself to surprise her. This was a chapter that was, for me, like, Mary and Sai, he was drawing a lot of parallels between them, and I totally started to see it as well. And I think the funny thing is Sai, towards the end of the conversation, realizes that he sees them as well. Like, he's not bullshitting here. Like, a lot of what he was saying wasn't as much of a lie as he thought it was. And
I just think he's so good at bullshitting that he starts to convince Mary, he starts to convince us, and then eventually he even starts to convince himself.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's the same diff in the end if everyone believes it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah. There's obviously also, this is the first mention we get of Yvette.
Yes.
Who is one of the people you mentioned earlier who from the group who's died. So again, that's a fun mystery I can't wait to learn more about as the rest of the story unfolds.
Yeah. Speaking of the rest of the story, let's move on to 1.8. Where it's called segues, right? It's natural. It keeps the conversation flowing, Elliot. Unless we stop to talk about it. Sylvester regroups with his team after being rescued, and then he does a bit of like criminal profiling, I guess, to try and figure out exactly who the mastermind is. And they narrow it down a bit before Sylvester pulls some tricky maneuvers to basically manipulate things to his own advantage. He leaves this great letter to the headmistress that we'll talk about. And from there, he gets the location of a few teachers, checks them out, and the first one he visits, Mr. Percy, is the mastermind, the puppeteer.
And so this chapter's kind of split in half. Like, the first half is, as you said, Sai is explaining everything he learnt to the rest of the group, and to be frank, to us, at least in my case, about what he got out of this confrontation with Mary, and they're starting to theorize. And then we move into that second half, which is where we really get to see, like, the snake Sai, like, in action. It's very fun. It's like a really cool detective scene, like he sort of talked about, but also because it's Sai, it involves, like, pointing knives at people's crotches and, like, writing stuff in blood. It's very fun.
It's so much fun. And okay, I think the funnest part of this story so far is the dynamics between this group, right? And the one we haven't touched on yet is the dynamic between Sylvester and Lillian. We touched on it a bit in the first chapter, but goddamn, their dynamic is so much fun. He just teases her so much, and, like, presumably he goes a bit harder on her because she's not exactly one of the gang, but she obviously kind of is as well. Like, they clearly see her as one of the gang. It's pretty.
Well, it's interesting because she's very new. Like, he brings up in 1.1 that this is, like, her third mission with them or something.
Yes.
And it almost feels like in 1.1 he thinks of her as not as part of the group, whereas you don't get that impression in the latter half of the arc.
Yes.
Or at least I didn't. And then, there's this moment where... So he goes on a big spiel early in the chapter about how what he did to Mary was create dissonance. So he challenged a belief that was so core to her identity that it makes her very predictable, because there's only a few things someone will do when their whole identity is threatened.
Yes.
And what's funny is that this gets delivered on later when he compliments Lillian, and she basically gets the same look on her face, and he realizes that him being nice to her has given her the same feeling of dissonance and basically like has shaken her core understanding of everything to the same level, which is so fun.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, I'm so excited to see this relationship continue to evolve, because it's such a thrilling one to me.
Yeah, I agree. Like he does, as you said, he seems to tease her more than the others. Is it because he sees her as different? Is it just because he knows she'll react more because she's newer, so she's less immune to his bullshit? It's going to be very interesting to see, where that goes.
Yeah. And again, Sylvester is at full Sherlock Holmes mode here, right? Like, he's doing the deductive reasoning, yes, but he's also doing this, like, manipulation of the headmistress. The trick with that note is so good. He, like, goes out of his way to make it as confusing as possible just to ensure that she reacts more primally. And it's 10 out of 10 Sherlock Holmes stuff from Sylvester this chapter, so great work, Si.
Like the sort of focus he has on this idea of people as bugs in a box, like this is a philosophy he espouses in this chapter, and I find it so interesting, like the idea that, if you've got a bunch of bugs in a box, it can be impossible to predict where they're going to move. There's too much chaos. But if you like shake the box and then give them a light, they'll all go towards it. And like that, you say, like, he doesn't predict people, he makes people predictable.
Yes.
By doing terrible things to them. It's such a fun concept. And as we've already touched on, in a world where the concept of human is probably going to be challenged in just about every angle it can be challenged on, it's going to be really fun to see his philosophy fail in all the various ways it can when people don't respond as he expects.
I'm sure that won't happen, Elliot. What are you talking?
Again, Si thinks about Yvette here and perhaps some others who are dead. I don't quite know what to make of this. I'm bringing it up to file it away as because I think he links them directly to his own experiment. Like, was he not the first wyvern? I don't know. I mean, I think like what's really fun about this whole thing is like we're really seeing at this point in the arc how defined the roles of each member of the group is. Like when they trust one person's judgment, how they all sort of trust each other and know each other's roles. And we already sort of talked about this. Feels like a world where all these experiments are kind of running amok. So I imagine what's going to start to happen is as the group grows, they're going to start to branch out of those roles, for want of a less punny word for it. I just
got it. Sorry.
We've seen all these little seeds of like Si not being as terrible as he's maybe meant to be. And I'm just really interested to maybe see as the story evolves if our gang here is going to start to branch out of their allocated roles, and whether that's going to be a good thing, like would be my guess. Like, they're gonna be better off for it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We'll have to see how that goes as the story evolves, I suppose.
Yeah, so just to jump ahead a bit, but while we're talking about it, in 1.10, Si has this whole sort of bit where he thinks to himself, like, oh, what would all the others say at this point? Like, he tries to put himself in each of their shoes to come up with the best plan. And that, for me, is, starting to see, like, Hale's built this team where they're each meant to fulfill a role, but if they get good enough with each other, they can start to not need all of them all the time. And that's going to be a really fun way for them to get a lot better at what they do.
Yeah. So in 1.9, Sylvester listens in as Mary is speaking with Percy, the puppet master, and he's kind of gathering small bits of information about their relationship. Mary and Percy decide to head back to the school to meet the rest of the murder children, and Sylvester attacks as they leave Percy's house. Successfully, he injures Percy, who runs to the school, and Mary kind of starts hiding in the shadows, and yeah, the game is afoot.
Yeah, and I mean, like I talked about how that first conversation drew parallels between Mary and Cy, but I think this chapter does it even more. Like watching Mary and Percy, or in fact, like Cy only ever really calls him the puppeteer. I don't know if Cy ever uses the term Percy for him.
Yeah.
Like to him, he's just the puppeteer.
Do you think that they're kind of dehumanizing him a bit, or?
Oh, I think there might be a bit of projecting there, because what I was going to say is comparing Mary and Percy is a lot like comparing Cy and Hale. Like that was instantly where my mind went.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like watching Mary and Percy kind of like logic their way to who these kids are reminded me of when the kids logic their way to who Percy was, like last chapter.
Yeah, definitely. They feel like mirror images of each other, right?
Yeah, like that was a big thing for me, is like, as this whole conflict goes on for the whole rest of this arc, you can't help but realize that the goodies and the baddies share a lot more traits than they don't. Like, I don't, you know, they've just fallen on opposite sides of the river, but you know, there's a lot of similarities between these two groups.
Yeah. Can we talk about Mary? Because I mean, she's so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Her relationship to Percy is so fascinating, because we kind of got the picture of the murder children as these, again, almost like zombies, almost like murder zombies. But Mary is so not that. She's clearly feels such a genuine, like, familial, paternal love for Percy, and Percy seems to feel similarly for her. And it's so funny. Like, it's obvious that when you compare the actual genuine familial relationship that these two have, and then you kind of look at the familial relationship that the Lambs have, it's like, who's actually the goodies here? Like, both of these groups have genuine care for each other. There's no good place on the scale to be here, right?
Yeah, like my summary of this whole conflict would be like a narcissism of small differences type situation. It basically comes down to which side of the academy you ended up on.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that. That's, and you know, we see when Mary switches later. But yeah, you know, obviously you've got this Mary and Percy relationship, and like you said, there seems to be genuine affection there on both sides.
Yes.
You know, especially as we learn later. And so it's interesting to compare this to Cy and Hale, where like I didn't get affection from either side, but I think Cy phrases it as like respect.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's his relationship with his father figure is closer to a business working relationship than it is any sort of loving relationship.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really fun, I guess, to see where that relationship goes and maybe how it ties back to what Mary and Percy had of, like, I can't decide if I want to say had or have.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. I do love the reflections between Percy and Mary and Cy and Hale. And yeah, I mean, I think this is something we might dive into more in our next episode of On the Lam.
Let's not make any promises we can't keep.
So, taking Route 1.10, the gang regroups again and starts searching the school for their quarry. Cy finds the rest of the group as they're tracking down one of the murdered children, and they've already dealt with another. So the only people left are the eldest murdered child, Mary, and Percy. So they eventually find them, and a fight breaks out before Percy throws a curveball. He's gone, seemingly, and the headmistress has emerged, reading the trigger words, the Manchurian Candidate kill phrase for this eldest clone.
Yeah, like I love the way that Cy's genius plan with the note has backfired on him here.
Yes.
Like the bit where he realizes what's happened and it's like, oh fuck. It's almost as good as when everyone gets poisoned in the dining hall before. Especially because he goes on a whole spiel like earlier in the chapter, like, oh, you know, I'm never wrong, and the headmistress has definitely believed my note. You can trust me. And the best part of that is he was right. In fact, she trusted it so much that Percy was just able to completely 180 flip it back on them.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And I mean, you know, the sort of mental chess match that Cy and Mary are engaged in early in this chapter, despite the fact that I think neither of them is anywhere near each other. But like you can tell they're both having to act as if the other one is right around the corner. It's really fun, like watching Sai just try and make his way through the halls and avoid where he thinks Mary could be.
Yeah, definitely. It's this weird, mental chess match, but also the reason it's so fun is because neither of them actually knows where the other one is. So it's this weird game of playing tag against somebody that's, invisible, or you don't know where they are, right? It's fascinating.
I think... there's even a read where you could suggest that she wasn't even ever really there. I think there's one bit where he thinks she went through the window, but that's it. They never see each other.
Yes. Yeah. It's great. It's so much fun. Now, okay, so this is the second time I've read this part of this story, right? And so this is the first thing that I didn't actually catch on my first read through, which is in Sai's inner monologue, he starts referring to Lillian as Lil right after she says that she hates it. So, and actually, I noticed it continues for the entire rest of this arc. So,
yeah.
Up until this point, Sai has been referring to Lillian as Lillian, and then she says the phrase, "I hate it when people call me Lillian." And then for the rest of the story, as far as we've seen, in Sai's internal monologue, it is Lil. Sai refers to her as Lil, not just to her face, inside his head, just to make sure that it sticks, which is such an arsehole move. It's so Sylvester.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing is, it's really showing you, it's not for show. The fact that he makes this transition just into his internal monologue shows, how deeply rooted this need to push buttons is in him. Presumably, again, thanks to whatever these treatments are. But, I mean, the bit that really got to me is when he's sort of explaining what he weren't when he was eavesdropping on Mary and Percy.
Yeah.
And he sort of says to the group, the boys are Mary's brothers. To Mary and the puppeteer. Mary is the sister. It's a little family unit. And Jamie brings up that Sai had just called Helen his sister.
Yes.
And Sai responds, "Oh, those two things aren't related." And it was just this is the least convincing lie Sai tells all arc.
Yeah.
It's so funny how transparently false that is to everyone except baby him. It's great.
You're right, it's so not a convincing lie.
He said it, and I was like, oh, come on, Sai, you're cleverer than that.
We're past this, surely. So, in 1.11, the eldest clone has been triggered, and now he's in full murder child mode, and Gordon basically almost gets himself killed trying to deal with this child, who is, I think, 1 or 2 years older than him. Eventually, both Gordon and this eldest murder child are kind of taken out of the fight, and so it's the remaining weaker lambs against Mary, who basically, you get the sense if she was at her proper emotional state right now, she would take care of them really easily.
But that's what Sai does.
Yes.
Is he doesn't let you be in that mental state.
Yes, Sai continues to work on her and she is obviously going through some really hard times right now. You do I felt bad for her here that she had to go up against Sai.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we probably haven't given that the airtime that it deserves, the existential crisis Mary is going through at the hands of Sai. But we should get there when Sai gets the note. I think that'll be the best time to talk about it. But overall, this is a really cool action scene.
Yes.
This whole chapter. I love watching Sai be in a fight despite being so shit at it. But he just tries to place himself in positions where the others can do good things. He just tries to get in the way.
I mean, he uses himself as a bit of a sacrificial lamb, right?
Hey. Oh, sorry.
He does do that. Jokes aside, he does do that. And so,
and then of course there's the bit where he throws Helen at Mary.
Yes.
And he sort of thinks to himself, better her than me. And I was just like, oh no, Sai, I was just starting to like you. I was just thinking there was a hero under there. And I lost that for a second, but it was all okay.
Yeah.
Faith restored.
Yes. So, Helen turns out to be a monster. She basically reveals her true form, doing this kind of boa constricting thing where she just kind of ensnares Mary in her, twisty body, I guess you would say.
I'm not going to lie, I didn't really follow what was happening. But
I think it's intentionally hard to follow exactly what Helen's body is doing, because we're kind of in Mary's head where it's what the fuck is happening right now?
Yeah, all I really got from it is that like limbs are moving in ways they shouldn't be able to move, and it catches like Mary completely off guard.
Yes.
Which is fair.
Well, yes, it caught me off guard too, and I've already read this
Yeah,
story.
exactly.
So Mary is kind of captured, and Sylvester offers her a place on the Lambs. And let's talk about Helen a bit more, because this is so terrifying, right? And the explanation that it's not just that she's an actress, she's actually like a full-on monster. And that's not me being mean, that's like the technical term for what she is. And it's like we bought into Sylvester's kind of trickery up until this point of he convinced Mary that she was just an actress, and we kind of bought it as well. I love that the way they unfold.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Her whole actress aspect, which up until now has been one of the most powerful parts of the group, is actually just a side effect to her real purpose. Yeah. Like that's what I love about it. And like, yeah, we obviously get the reveal here that of all of them, like, Helen is the only one of the lambs that was vat grown. Well, until now, because obviously we've got Mary, and I think that's going to be a really fun angle to play with. Like, you know, obviously we're going to be exploring what is human, not just throughout the whole story, but specifically with the lambs, and now having these two vat grown members is going to be a really fun way to, like, I guess, start looking at that.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially because we should talk about it now, but Sai has completely turned Mary around because he's made her realize that, you know, Percy is, you know, just using her and he doesn't actually care for her. And that's not true. Like, especially we see in the interlude that's not completely true. Like, Percy actually did really care for her, and that's going to be very fun to play with later, I imagine.
Yes, we'll get to this, but Percy survives. So you can't help but think, hold on, I spy a potential web of lies that could come crashing down here.
Yeah, exactly. But it's so fun because, like, this whole thing with Mary, like, I think it was so much Sai projecting. Like, I got this real sense of, you know, if he can turn Mary against Percy, and you know, she's without her creator or whatever, and she's, you know, with them, like, I feel like maybe there's a sense of, like, that's the closest he can get to freeing himself from Project Wyvern and the Academy. Like I feel like there's a sense of he's trying to save her from a situation that's kind of similar to his. And like, what's interesting is, yes, he's achieved that, but it turns out she may be in a better position than he was. So yeah, it's gonna be so fun to see where this goes.
Definitely. So our final chapter of this arc, 112, until we get to the interlude, I suppose. Our final numbered chapter. The Lambs head back to Radham Academy to be debriefed and healed and appointmented. They're all taken off to their respective areas, which all seem to be horrible in their own ways. And we see Mary decide to join the Lambs, and she starts revealing information about Percy. Namely, he wasn't acting alone. There is a larger group at play here. There's a conspiracy brewing.
Yeah. So, yeah, So, like, something that I want to talk about with Mary at the end here is we have our attention drawn to the fact that Hale notices that Sai is, like, helping Mary, and Sai points out a number of times in this chapter he's really making mistakes because he's quite tired and he's all beat up and stuff. But yeah, like, I think it's pretty safe to say now that, like, he likes Mary. Like, you know, I think he really wants her in the group because I think he genuinely likes her.
Yes.
And Hale's obviously seen that, and I was just talking about, like, you know, these parallels between Hale and Sai and Mary and Percy. It's going to be really fun to see what they do with Mary if they allow her on the group. And, you know, I talked about how maybe Sai was trying to liberate her from her old captor, but has he just put her in a worse situation with his captor or creator? Yeah, I guess we'll see.
I guess no comment.
I mean, obviously we should touch on the bit early in this chapter as well, which is that delivery on the bit from 1.3 about where Lacey basically comes in and says goodbye because she's quitting the program.
Yeah. Sylvester has talked her into quitting.
And you know, again, this is the first of Sai's big mistakes in this chapter, where just because he's tired, he actually just accidentally tells her the truth about why he's pushing her away. And it's because she's good at her job and he doesn't want that. Because, and again, like, I think this is that thing, like, I don't think Sai wants to be the way he is, and for whatever reason, he doesn't seem to be able to consciously process that very well. But like, I feel like, things like pushing Lacey away, that's his way of trying to fuck with the program so it can't be as effective, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's unclear, I think, whether it's that, which it definitely could be, I think is a fair read, or if it's Sylvester. He kind of just wants more autonomy, and so he wants people who aren't going to give a shit as much about their job. And we see in 1.12 the other people that are involved with him who clearly don't give a shit, and that seems to be what he wants.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think maybe it's the same thing in a way. Like, yeah, that might just be two ways of phrasing the same idea.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, as we round out the end of the first arc, I think the big question that I have for you, Elliot, is what do you think about the Academy?
I mean, it just seems like a cool place full of nice, well-meaning people.
pushing the envelope in respect to science, advancing the world, making the world a better place. In a responsible way. Yeah, ethical, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I'm assuming we're going to learn that the Academy is, like, at best, like a kind of bull rider in how they're controlling the science of this world. Like, I assume they're flying by the seats of their pants as much as anyone, and they're fostering the illusion of control to stop society from completely falling apart. I guess we'll see, but like I said we weren't going to do Pact spoilers, and this is very early, like, general Pact spoilers.
Shame on you.
My apologies, but like I do just want to quickly bring up, like, Pact at a very high level was sort of looking at power structures and how, like, entrenched power structures can be a problem. Like, that was one of the things Pact was talking about. And I think even in our Pact sequel brainstorming session in APU, I talked about, like, wouldn't it be cool if a sequel to Pact looked at, what does changing a system look like? And I don't think we need that anymore, because, like, Twig is doing that in a very explicit way, where, like, Twig has gone the opposite tack, and it's like, here's a power system that is just completely out of control from the looks of it. Like, things are going, and I don't think anyone has any control over what's happening on a large scale here. And the Academy and whatever the Shadow Academy thing is, like, are maybe going to try and attempt to do it, but it's like, like, this is just like a system that is changing at an uncontrollable rate. And how do you deal with a system like that? I think that's what Twig is maybe going to be looking at, and, like, that's really fun as a conceptual follow-up to some of the themes Pact was addressing.
Yeah, definitely. I like the fact that there are clear threads of seemingly Wildbow thinking, well, I would have liked to explore this or this a bit more, so let's try and tie some themes of that into this world.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump ahead and we'll talk about the interlude, and then we'll wrap up with a bit of an appointment.
Okay.
So the interlude, Enemy, it follows their enemy, who was Percy in this arc. It's Percy trying to escape Dog and Catcher, who are referenced other Academy kind of project that seem to be basically bounty hunters for the Academy. Dog and Catcher, the bounty hunters. Anyway, so Percy tries to escape them, but fails. He is caught very easily. But at the last moment before he is caught and carted away to the Academy, he's rescued by a mysterious group of villains, maybe, who ask him to continue his work, but with more support and more resources.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is really fun that it's just sort of an interlude that's from the perspective of the enemy. It gives us, like, to finish off the arc, it really feels like it's setting up this, presumably conflict that's probably going to define most of the story, at least.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like we've just got a council of people who are spurned or don't believe in the Academy. It's a Wildbow work, though, so there's probably going to be some other twist on it that I don't see coming. So I can't wait to learn more about that. This is also, I had pulled out the quote where a name that's mentioned a couple of times, particularly in this chapter, is Wallstone.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I'd noticed that Wollstonecraft was Mary Shelley's mum's maiden name. So it's a really fun direct reference to sort of Frankenstein. Frankenstein's works there. I think that's a really it's an indirect and niche kind of reference to tie the world a bit to something that I think must have been a bit of an inspiration.
Yes. I love the idea that potentially Mary Shelley was the first biomancer in this world and defined a lot of how this world changed. I think that's a great little beat.
Yeah, I mean, like, because you know, like, I think the themes we're already seeing in Twig are extensions and playing off of stuff that Frankenstein touched on. And if you want to hear us talk more about that, go right back to Media and Me.
Oh yeah, we did talk about Frankenstein. I forgot that.
It was one of the first ones we did, actually. It's probably not a good episode. I actually changed my mind. Don't go listen to it.
It's a real early one.
It's like episode 8 or something.
Yeah, damn.
But yeah, like, you know, a lot of the things that are brought up in Frankenstein, like you know, science running out of control and stuff, like that's what Twig is extending from the looks of it. So it's good to see it sort of directly referenced in as a, you know, something that has controlled the direction of this world.
Yeah, definitely. Now the listeners at home can't see this, but I've posted some fan art of Dog and Catcher in the notes, which just gives us a nice little picture of what they look like. They're adorable. I love Dog.
I don't want it to be like experimenting and trying new things for this pilot season, but putting pictures in our notes that the viewers can't see. I don't know if this is a segment that's going to stick.
All right. I'll describe it. So, the picture of Dog, he kind of looks like a dragon. It's got a lot of reddy, browny kind of colours, yellowy browns, and he's got big horns, and somebody is feeding him an apple. And that's the story.
Yeah. Look, I'm not going to really criticize the dog picture because it's, you know, obviously 1,000 times better than I can do. And if you doubt that, go back and watch All Packed Up and see the art that we did do. But, like, this dog looks too organic. Like, the descriptions in the thing, it's got, like, all this metallic framing.
Yes.
And, like, all these tubes. And, again, like, I think this is a great example of the situation of this world. Like, we talked about how all the buildings are being held up by, like, these trees that are kind of semi-controlled growths to support the buildings. And, like, you know, here we've got this giant experiment that's held together by extra tubes and metal limbs that were added to it. Like, this world is just such a fucking mess. It's like, and I love how that's sort of echoed in all these designs.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is a beautiful theme for a world, right? The idea of everything barely holding on.
Yeah,
I want to talk about Percy.
Well, the technical debt that they're amassing in this world is just truly out of control.
You're a fucking nerd.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that one.
Yeah,
I apologize.
I want to talk about Percy. I don't like him. Like, I don't feel any compassion for him, and I don't know why, because he's clearly not the worst character that we've met so far in this story.
That would go had the same thing where I was
assuming.
Like, yeah, I mean, that's I had the same sort of thought where I was like, well, you know, he's not that bad. He has reasons to hate the Academy, and he did seem to like Mary, although, of course, Mary is the clone of another kid that he sold.
Yes.
And he, you know, sold and kidnapped and killed children, so it seems weird to try and defend him as well. Like, yeah. But I think that's just this world, right? Is there any character so far that we can look at and say they're doing great?
Yeah, no, there isn't. But I don't feel any compassion for Percy. Like, he's just a tool in every sense of the word, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you're maybe being harsher on him than I am, personally. But, like, I mean, I get it. He's definitely not a good person.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I'm just gonna say it. I'm pro Academy. They've done no wrong that I can see.
I think my opinion so far is that being pro anything in this world is a bit of a hot take.
Yeah. Speaking of the Academy, Elliot, as everyone obviously knows listening to this show, at the end of each episode, it's time for your appointment. It's Elliot's appointment. Musical sting. Elliot, welcome to your appointment. Time for us to check in on just how you're feeling about Pact as a whole. So let's start.
Wait, Pact? Or...
Oh, shit, sorry.
Old habits die hard.
Twig. Time to check in on how you're feeling about Twig as a whole. So let's start by talking about the arc title, Taking Root. What do you think? What do you think is the theme of this arc title?
I mean, to take root is to, like, become fixed or established, and that's what the story's doing. Like, it makes sense as an arc 1 title.
Definitely, yes.
And then obviously, you know, we start to see these various groups that are presumably going to be in the story taking root. So I don't know that.
Okay,
I guess.
Yeah. definitely. What are some...
This is really... I'm very uncomfortable right now.
What are some themes from this arc that you enjoyed? It's an appointment. It's not meant to be pleasant, Elliot. What are some themes from this arc that you found?
I mean, yeah, we've already sort of touched on all this as you'd expect, but like the fact that all the goodies and the baddies are just kind of the same was something that really hit home for me in this arc. And then, yeah, like again, as we've touched on, just how fragile this world is. Like it's on the brink of just completely losing control, I think.
And how does that make you feel?
I mean, excited as a reader.
Yes. Now, how well do you think Mary will integrate with the team? Do you think they'll let her on board?
I mean, I do, just because it's been so set up in Arc 1, it'd be a weird thread to just sidle around, maybe. But I think she'll be good for the team. Like, they need more physical threats. That became clear when they were fighting her 2 chapters ago.
Yeah, it would have really helped if she was on the team back when they were fighting her.
But, like, you know, apart from, like, Gordon, who can do fist fights, they need, like, a long-range fighter. So it'd be good to have her. I think she'll play off Sai in a really fun way. I already talked about how there were so many similarities drawn between them. Because I think they share a lot of traits, but they're also probably going to butt heads on some things. Like, she is someone who was not built to be a member of this group, and it's going to be really fun to see how she integrates into the team. And maybe does she fill this hole that Yvette left? I still don't know who Yvette is. Maybe Sai likes her so much because she reminds him of Yvette.
Maybe Mary is Yvette. Who knows?
Well, that would be
a
twist that I wouldn't understand yet.
And how did you find the story so far?
I mean, I really like it.
And do you have any other thoughts on it?
No. I mean, yeah, this is really fun. I'm enjoying this biopunk stuff that we talked about. I always loved this stuff in some of the other Wildbow works, like the body horror stuff. So I'm right here for it. I quite like that we have a team here that just functions like a good unit. I always enjoy that part of stories where the team is just like a well-oiled machine, and that is going to be tested, I know, but
yes.
I also like that we get to see these moments where they're just an effective strike team.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun, right? Like, fuck, it's so much fun. The start of this story, the dynamics in this group, the way they play off each other like the children version of the cast from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's great. It's just so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's also really fun having a Wildbow protagonist who's just like a normal human boy.
Yeah, sure. That's exactly what he is. Yeah, he's just a normal human boy.
In terms of like physical abilities, like
I see.
You know, like Taylor had bug controlling powers. The other protagonists in Wildbow works have had powers of their own. Sai obviously has some like mental stuff going on, but like physically, in fact, he's not even a regular human. He's
worse
than
regular than a normal child. Yes.
And I like that. That's a fun, unique thing that like I'm excited to see unfold throughout the rest of the story.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to see it unfold through the rest of the story as well. I guess we'll have to talk about that next time when we talk about Arc 2 for On the Lam. Or
again,
will
stop
we?
making promises we can't keep.
Or will we? Because, yes, this was our first pilot. If you'd like to leave us your thoughts on what you thought of On the Lam, how much do you like it compared to our other pilots? Or just by itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's the first one, so maybe leave those comments till a bit later in pilot season. Yeah. But, you can let us know what you thought about On the Lam in general and stuff. We'll have a Reddit thread that you'll find in the show notes down below.
Yep, there's also a Google form that you can go to where you can leave your thoughts directly. Or, hey, shoot us a message on the Discord. That's where we're going to be chatting about these pilots as they come out as well. That Discord, I should say, is available to all patrons of the Doof Media Network who back us for any amount of money. $1 a month or more, but I actually don't think you can do less than that. So any amount of money and you get access to the Discord.
Yeah, and it's honestly, it's such a great place. You should really come hang out with us if you haven't already. We're all getting through the quarantine together. It's a great online community to be doing that with. So head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media and have a look if you're interested.
Yes, and of course, this show On the Lam wouldn't exist without Wildbow. So, for possibly the final time, I'm going to say this, head on over to to Wildbow's Patreon at www.patreon.com/Wildbow.
Yeah, because that Patreon is what keeps him writing, and we want him to do that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So
yeah. You can speak for me and say that. Yeah, it's true. Thanks for joining us, folks. Leave us your thought on this pilot, and we'll see you next week for another new pilot.
Yes, we'll be diving into the Empire of the East for our next one.
See you there.